Dying, Christ destroyed our death. Rising, Christ restored our life. Christ will come again in glory. As in baptism, Alan put on Christ, so in Christ may Alan be clothed with glory. Here now, dear friends, we are God's children. What we shall be has not yet been revealed, but we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Those who have this hope purify themselves as Christ is pure. Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and I am life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, yet shall they live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I hold the keys of hell and death. Because I live, you shall live also." Friends, we have gathered here to praise God and to witness to our faith and to celebrate the life of Alan Ray Wilhoit. We come together in grief, acknowledging our human loss. May God grant us grace that in pain we find comfort, in sorrow hope, and in death resurrection. You should have been given a program, and you will find on there a prayer, opening prayer that I would like for you to join me in saying in unison. Do we need to hand some out real quick? If we're good to go, would you join me, please, in praying? Eternal God, we praise you for the great company of all those who have finished their course in faith and now rest from their labor. We praise you for those dear to us whom we name in our hearts before you. Especially we praise you for Alan Wilhoit, whom you have graciously received into your presence. To all of these grant your peace. Let perpetual light shine upon them, and help us so to believe where we have not seen, that your presence may lead us through our years, and bring us at last with them into the joy of your home, not made with hands, but eternal in the heavens. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I'm going to read a few New Testament passages from the J.B. Phillips translation. I believe those are printed on the back of your bulletins. First, 2 Corinthians 4, 7 through 13. This priceless treasure we hold in a common earthenware jar. To show the splendid power of it belongs to God and not to us. We are handicapped on all sides, but we are never frustrated. We are puzzled, but never in despair. We are persecuted, but we never have to stand it alone. We may be knocked down, but we are never knocked out. Every day we experience something of the death of the Lord Jesus, so that we may also know the power of the life of Jesus in these bodies of ours. Yes, we who are living are always being exposed to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be plainly seen in our mortal lives. We are always facing death, but this means that you know more and more of life. And from Romans 8, 38 through 39. I have become absolutely convinced that neither death nor life, neither messenger of heaven nor monarch of earth, neither what happens today or what may happen tomorrow, neither a power from on high nor a power from below, nor anything else in God's whole world has any power to separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ our Lord.
the microphone.
Hi, I'm Josie Pearl. You love my name because Pearl was for his grandmother. This is Yu's favorite poem. Last year for school, he picked it for me to learn. I sent him a video and he was so happy. It made him cry a little. Here it is. Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Whose words are these? I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bell a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have a promise to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Thank you.
Sorry, I got to get my notes organized here. Thank you, Josie. That was a beautiful poem. Thank you all for coming today. We truly appreciate the outpouring of love and support we've received. Thank you to everyone who shared a kind word, sent food, stopped by to visit, called, or texted. Special thanks to Megan. I'll make it through, I promise. Special thanks to Megan, who took charge of Dad's medical care and took him to his numerous appointments, talked to the doctors, regulated his medicine, and loved him. Thank you, Anna and Ben, for translating everything the doctors were telling us, because Megan and I were kind of lost. And thank you, Mom, for staying home the last month to take care of him. You had the toughest job of all. Joe, that last weekend you spent watching ball games with Dad meant the world to him, and he loved spending time with you. Thank you, Ben, Chris, Dawn, and Stephanie for being supportive of us. Oh, this is harder than I thought. I told the kids if I make eye contact with you, you have to make a funny face at me, so if I look at you, do something. Dad was a very thankful person. He always showed gratitude and would certainly repay a debt of gratitude. He spent a lifetime volunteering and giving to others and his community. He was a man of strong moral character, known for his integrity and work ethic. These traits came from a lifetime of learning from the people in his life, like his parents, Thelma and Rusty, people he worked with, like Guy Zimmerman, and good friends like the ones here today. You would probably hear him reference a book called The 7 Habits that he thought was probably one of the most important books a young person could read. Thanks to this book, it would strike up a conversation 30 years ago with a man that would become his best friend, mentor, religious advisor, and brother from another mother, Larry May. Dad loved to tell a story and a joke, but most of the time he was the only one laughing. I've put together a brief history of his life using the stories I heard most over the years. Dad was born in Greenville in 1949 to Rusty and Thelma Wilhoit, two humble and hard-working people that taught Dad the value of a hard day's work, to always be courteous and kind, and most of all, be thankful. They didn't have much growing up, so everyone was expected to help out. Dad did his part by getting summer jobs. He'd tell us about being in the top tier of a barn, hanging tobacco while balancing on a beam, loading hay on the wagons, and delivering newspapers early in the morning. When he would tell us about these jobs,
You wouldn't hear any complaints about the labor. He always had good stories about friends working alongside him, who fell in the tobacco barn, how many bales of hay they could load in a day, and how early he remembers getting up to deliver newspapers. He wouldn't complain about work because he knew it was just a part of life, and he knew complaining about work would most likely get him more work from Thelma. He was thankful for the work and used the money to buy his first motorcycle. When he wasn't working or in school, you'd find Dad on the ball field with aspirations of making it into the big leagues. He knew deep down he didn't quite have the athleticism to make it past high school ball, but with fans like Papaw Gurney and his dad Rusty, Uncle Austin, and Tommy Harmon cheering him on, he felt like it was possible. Tommy was one fan in the crowd. No matter how good or bad the game was going, he'd yell out, "Good job, Al." Dad was thankful and would always remember how he felt when Tommy was in the stands. He told me Tommy was one of the many Tommies he and Mom named me after. And I learned recently that Mamaw referred to Tommy as the town drunk, so I'm not sure how I feel about being named after the Otis Campbell of Greene County. Dad enjoyed his childhood in Greenville, loved his parents and his brother Mac, even though most of the stories I heard were the typical big brother picking on little brother. For those of you that know Mac, you know that's not far-fetched. He still calls me Thomasina after 40 years. Dad would tell me a story about playing cards with Mac and two of their friends, and I'm sure he could fill in names because I couldn't remember. But, all right. Well, Dad and Phil were passing cards under the table, or Mike? Okay. Dad was passing cards under the table to the other boy, and the other guy at the table caught it and got mad at Dad and kind of threatened him. So Mac did what any big brother would do. He flung the table out of the way and charged the kid and pinned him down and said, "I'm the only one who can threaten my little brother." Dad was thankful he had a big brother that always had his back. Since Dad was always passing the time with work and playing ball and hunting and fishing, his schooling wasn't that top-notch. A few teachers even told him he wouldn't amount to much in life. I'd say he proved them wrong. At the time, this didn't really bother him much. He figured he'd never leave Greenville and would drive a delivery truck and have a simple life similar to his parents. He was happy living the country life, but during this time period, there was a war going on, and he had two options: make better grades and go to college, or head off to war. Well, Dad was more of a lover than a fighter, so he improved his grades and managed to get into Tennessee Wesleyan. His first day there, he was already causing problems. Being an avid hunter, he decided to take his 16-gauge double-barrel shotgun with him to the dorm, just in case he wanted to hunt on the weekends. Of course, that didn't go over well, and they didn't let him keep it, so he sent it home with Papaw. His first day of college was already a drag. It wasn't too long until he was able to have his gun back. His grades weren't good enough for college, and he knew he'd be failing out, so that meant being drafted. And at the time, he was dating the daughter of a colonel in the National Guard that helped him get into the National Guard. And while Dad was in basic training, his years of hunting helped him impress the drill sergeants. And the first day on the range, he kept hitting the targets with ease, and the drill sergeant yelled out, "Hey boy, where are you from?" And Dad replied, "Tennessee." And the drill sergeant replied, "That figures. You country boys know how to shoot." Dad would go on to earn the rank of second lieutenant, train at Fort Knox with the Armored Division, and eventually make his way back to college as a UT student. While at UT, Dad had many friends and lived with a few biker buddies named Goose and FP. They rented a house on White Avenue and called themselves the Hogs of White Avenue. Dad won't like this next part, but he earned the nickname Dirt, which he'd probably not want me to share today, but I feel like you all have the right to know that he had dirty feet in college. He walked around barefoot in a house that had black soot on the floor from the stove, and he wouldn't take the time to wash his feet, so his bedding would get dirty, and his roommates saw it, and they nicknamed him Dirt. So kids, learn a lesson here today. Keep your feet clean when you go to college, or you might earn a nickname that you don't like. Dad would be thankful I included a lesson in his eulogy. Well, Dad finally graduated college, an accomplishment he didn't believe was possible, sent his resume off to a few places, and set off on his famed 6,000-mile motorcycle trip across the country. He set out for the West Coast with a few friends, and along the way had the adventure of a lifetime. They rode to California and up the coast to British Columbia and back to Tennessee. He had countless stories from these trips and many photos, and I was reminded of one of the stories recently. And at one point, Dad was heading back from British Columbia, and I think he was in Idaho, and he was by himself at this point because most of his friends, either their bikes broke down or I think someone ended up staying with a sister, and so Dad was on his own on this leg. And he had stopped to camp, and so he just threw a tarp over his bike, and he was sleeping under it. And he said in the middle of the night he kept hearing this noise off in the distance, and he thought, oh, Lord, what's out there and what's about to kill me? And it kept getting closer and closer and closer until a stray dog appeared. And, of course, he had a sigh of relief. And he was thankful it wasn't a bear coming up to eat him. When he returned home, he had a few job offers and was hired on with the federal government, an organization I'm sure you all heard him speak fondly of. The job eventually had him living in Kentucky, and he'd occasionally drive to Knoxville to visit. He came in town one weekend to meet up with Mac and Barbara, who brought along a friend for Dad to meet, Mary Ann Sheridan. Sorry, faces, come on. Funny faces. The future Mrs. Wilhoit. I like to think Dad spent the weekend getting to know Mom, falling in love with her, and then the entire drive back to Kentucky just thinking of her. Mom obviously left an impression because he would drive back to Knoxville to visit, she'd go see him, and soon enough they were getting married. Together they would travel all over the U.S. for Dad's job and eventually settle in D.C., where he got a permanent job with the Department of Labor and worked for his mentor, Guy Zimmerman. When you hear people speak about Dad's integrity, this is where a lot of it comes from. Guy was a major influence on Dad, and he was always thankful for the years he spent working with him. Other names we would often hear when we were kids were Phil and Barbie Williamson. Dad worked with Phil, and they became close friends that would take their wives on double dates and go on family vacations. Phil and Barbie weren't able to make it today, but Phil did send a letter that I'd like to read. This is from Phil. I met Alan in D.C. in 1976. We both worked for the Department of Labor as auditors and just happened to be placed in cubicles across from each other. We struck up an immediate friendship after finding out that we both started our careers in Atlanta working for the same extremely tough boss. If you did not perform and check your work, the boss would assign you a dead-end office that required 4 left turns to get there. And the boss would send out a memo to everyone not to speak to that person, who was soon to be on the way out. At the Department of Labor, as time passed, we became very close, ate lunches together, and spent most of our conversations on how to become a better auditor. Alan and Mary Ann lived in a house in Northern Virginia that was divided in 3 separate living spaces. Wally lived in one section, another couple, Stan and Marlo, were in another. Over time, we began to party together, and someone came up with the idea of, over Labor Day weekend, going to the beach on Assateague Island, where the wild horses roam. The island is located next to Ocean City, Maryland. We were too poor to get motel rooms, but cheap campsites on the sand dunes were within our budgets. We took our first camping trip, and we had so much fun together that it became a repeat every Memorial and Labor Day. So there you go, Josie. That his favorite holidays were Memorial Day and Labor Day. However, there was one major headache. Heading to the beach required crossing the one artery, the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, and the stoplights on the highways heading into Maryland. Traffic was horrible in both directions and often took 4 hours each way. Phil had a better plan on one of these trips to the beach. He flew his airplane for an elapsed time of less than 20 minutes instead of taking the long drive. Thankfully, Alan picked up Barbie and I at Ocean City Airport about a half mile from the island in his famous yellow Winnebago Chevy van. We had 3 great days of warm sun, beach, and dune walking and being entertained by the wild horses who seemed to like our leftover pancakes. Mary Ann and the girls dreaded the long drive back, so the idea came up that Phil would fly them back to D.C. while Alan took the long 4-hour drive home. As we loaded Mary Ann, Anna, and Megan into the airplane to head back to D.C., Alan looked straight at me with a serious look and said, "Phil, you have my entire family in there." And just like that, the essence of Alan Wilhoit became so clear. He was clearly thinking of his family, a moment I will always remember. I will always miss my friend, advisor, and confidant. May the Lord look with favor on Alan's family while Alan awaits his family gathering with him once again. Funny faces. Come on. As you can see from Phil's letter, family was very important to Dad. When we were little, we all have fond memories of Dad. He was our Little League coach, basketball coach, softball coach, taught us to ride bikes and roller skate. I asked my mom and siblings to share some memories, and Mom's fondest memories were handing each child to their dad for the first time. Dad always told me that when she handed me over, she said, "That's it, you name him." Good thing for Joey that they weren't done having kids just yet. Oh, printed off Anna's, so give me a second. Hannah said on Saturdays when I was a kid, he would take me to the roller skating rink. He would skate with me the entire time, and he would be doing tricks on his skates, the black ones with the neon green wheels. And then he would take me to the ground round to eat burgers and watch a movie. It was a movie cinema restaurant. It was my one-on-one time with him, and I loved those Saturdays. She shared another memory. When I was brand new pregnant with Vivi, he asked me to meet him in Vegas. He didn't even know yet about Vivi. We did the Vegas stuff, but then he planned a night at a dude ranch in the Grand Canyon, a place with warnings to check our shoes for scorpions before we put them on in the morning. And in the middle of the night, a pack of coyotes came into the camp and woke us up. It sounded like ghosts of people yelping and screaming for help. He was awake first, and then I woke up and thought I was hallucinating and gave a "what in the world is that?" He was laughing his laugh. That meant he really thought it was funny. Scorpions and coyotes for baby's first UU experience. Megan, just like any kid who doesn't want to go to sleep at bedtime, would always ask Dad to tell stories about his dog Blackie. He couldn't resist saying no to his little girl with the mad scientist hair, and this would get Megan an extra hour at night, just her and Dad. Joe's fondest memories were visiting Gurney and Pearl in Greenville with Dad and seeing the joy in his eyes. Whenever a weekend trip of visiting Thelma and Rusty was over, the last stop on the way out of town was always Pearl and Gurney. It was Dad's favorite place. My fondest memories of Dad was always on the creek. When I was 8 years old, and Dad was pretty much my age now, he took me to a place that would become a second home to us, the most important weekend every year in April, City Cove Creek. I'm sure all of you at some point heard him speak about City Cove. It was his other favorite place in the world. It was a special place for me because Dad and I would spend this weekend getting to know each other. He'd share stories with me about his life, like the ones I've told. I'd ask him for advice, and sometimes he'd even ask me. When I was much older, we'd sip on whiskey and smoke little Macanudo cigars like we were Clint Eastwood. We'd get up before sunrise in 30-degree weather and find a spot down by the creek an hour before sunup and wait to make the first cast. Joe told me one of his other fondest memories on the creek. He and Dad were out fishing one afternoon and they got caught in a rainstorm. And the two of them sat under a tree, huddled under Dad's poncho, waiting for it to pass. A memory of your dad keeping you safe and dry will always stay with you. Well, eventually he'd be in charge of scheduling our annual fishing trip after some of the older guys started passing away. John Allen, who was sort of the patriarch of the group, passed the reins to Dad, knowing he would carry on the tradition. We went up there one final time last April, and Dad, he caught a fish right by the campsite, and he was so, just for about 2 hours straight, he was just smiling because he caught this fish and he brought it back to the campsite and he, cleaned it, seasoned it, put it on the fire and cooked it up, and he sat by the fire eating it, and he kept telling me, "Come over, I want you to take a picture of this. I want everyone to see this." And it was just the happiest moment I can remember of him up on the creek. We're going to go up there again this April. And hopefully my kids will join me for the next 30 years like I got with him and make memories. Oh. My other favorite memories with Dad were all the movies and TV shows we'd watch together, especially Westerns. If the Outlaw Josie Whale was on, we'd always call or text each other and say, it's on this channel. Another movie we loved to watch was City Slickers. It was about some New Yorkers that go on a cattle drive out west with a hard-nosed trail boss named Curly. Well, one night during the trip, Curly dies in his sleep, and the New Yorkers have to put on this funeral service out in the middle of nowhere. None of them really know what to say, so they ask the camp cook, known as Cookie, to say a eulogy. Well, Cookie lowers his head and says, "Lord, we give you Curly. Try not to piss him off." Dad would laugh his hysterical laugh no matter how many times we watched that movie. I think he'd start laughing before the scene even came on. So I told him, "Dad, I'm going to use that line when the day comes. So, Lord, we give you Al, Alan, Dad, you. Give him a hug for us." Thank you for the funny face. Do you want to come up? All right. My daughter Mary, who some of you know as Birdie, why don't you come over here?
He was the best grandfather I've ever had. He took me fishing, and I caught my first fish. It was a largemouth bass. I was screaming across the whole campsite. I caught a largemouth bass. He picked me up from school, took me to karate. I lived with him for 3 years, and I love you, and I always will, even if you're not here. And then I'm going to say Oliver's.
Oliver wants to come up?
No, I'm going to read his.
Oh, well, that's right. She's going to do a reading for Oliver.
He watched me ski. I watched Josie and him play checkers. I will love you forever. Love, Oliver.
Yeah, go ahead and sit down. So we want to open it up to anyone who wants to come up and share a word about Dad, a memory or something you're thankful for knowing him. And then after everybody has a little something to say, Larry's going to come up and finish up for us. So there's a microphone if anybody wants to come up here to the podium, or I can bring the mic down. Mike?
Here, you come up there.
Yeah.
Well, the only thing I would ever tell you about Al is something funny, I guess. I grew up in Mackinac, and we loved to go to their house because they had every kind of sports stuff you can name. They had real bows and arrows and a real pool table, and just anything you wanted to play, they had it. And I was stationed in Charleston, South Carolina for about a year and a half, and my best friend from the service, he'd say, "Why do you always go to Greenville when you have leave?" Oh, no, I'm sorry, go to Knoxville when you have leave. And several people asked me that because I'd just head out as soon as I could and come back right before I had to be back. And I said, "Well, Frank, why don't you just go with me one weekend, and I'll show you why." And when I went up there, I always had a date for the weekend. I had concert tickets, I had football tickets. They had everything for me already set up. And I told Frank as we pulled into Knoxville, this was when Al was living down on White Avenue, and I said, now Frank, I've got to go do something, but let me tell you what's going to happen. We're going to knock on the door. The guy's going to come to the door who's barefoot, and I'm going to say, "Frank, this is Al. Al, this is Frank." And then he's going to look at you and say, "Hi, Frank, you want a beer?" And you go in, and he'll take care of you till I get back. So we showed up, knock, knock. Here he comes barefoot. "Frank, Al, Al, Frank. Hi, Frank, you want a beer?" Word for word. And I always say he's probably the most laid-back person I ever met in my life. I don't know what he was when he got older. We didn't have that much contact, but for a while he was just unperturbable. I'll tell you one more quick story. This time I was stationed in Key West, and I was heading back from Greenville to Key West, and I saw Al walking down the street. And he said, I rolled my window down and I said, "Al, I'm headed for Key West. Why don't you come along with me?" He stood there for a minute, thought about it. I said, "I can sneak you on the base and give you a place in the barracks, and you can come down the submarine and eat. No problem." He thought about it a minute. He said, "Okay, I'm going." And so we had to stop. He had to stop in and tell Rusty that he was going to Key West, and he was in there a while. And he finally came out, and I looked at him and I said, "So, what happened?" He said, "I told Rusty I was headed to Key West with you," and he said, "No, you're not." And I said, "Yes, I am." So he got in the car with me, and we drove probably 100 miles into Georgia, and neither one of us had said a word to the other. We're just driving. And he just about scared me to death, and he, just out of his mouth he said, "Come along and ride this train." And he went into, "Come along and ride this train through Georgia," and just went through this thing. I guess it was a song or something, I don't know, but going like that on the road. And we went all the way to Key West, and I can't even remember how he got home. But there's a bunch more stories, but like I said, just the funny ones. I had come up for the weekend, and it was Alabama and Tennessee football. And I decided at 8 o'clock in the morning on the Saturday for a noon game that I was going to the game. And I told the people I was staying with, and they said, there's no way you can get a ticket. No way in the world you can get a ticket. So I went around asking everybody I knew, people I didn't know, and I'd gone upstairs and I'd knocked on Al's door and he never answered it. And then I was heading down and I heard his voice. He said, "Earl, is that you?" So I went back and opened the door and went in, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I've decided I'm going to that football game today." He said, "You don't have a ticket, do you?" And I said, "No." He said, "I'm just trying to find one." And there was a young girl sitting there, and she said, "My mother has a ticket that's not being used." And I said, I got her a helmet, and we got on the motorcycle, and I said, "Let's take me to your mother's." So we did, and I was in my 20s at the time, and this woman had season tickets right on the 50-yard line. And she said, "Meet me at such and such a gate." So I met her at the gate, and she latched that arm into my arm, and we went up there, and she paraded herself to her seat while all these other people said, "Look at her." And she was just smiling. And I said, "Oh, okay, you wanted a young guy on your arm? Shoot, I get to see the game on the 50-yard line. I'll be your man."
Hi, I'm Kirsten. I am Alan's second granddaughter. What I remember most about him was I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and we went out to this farm with his friend Connie, and she had so many horses, I couldn't count them all, and I was so excited. And I just decided that day that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to ride horses, and I wanted to figure out a way to do that. And he got on it immediately, and he had a wonderful friend, Roz and Tim Hinton. And as soon as I met them, that was it. And I started learning how to ride, and that was some of the greatest experiences I've ever had, and it was all thanks to him. And he was always so happy and so proud to see me riding and to see me learn new things. And he would always give me advice on how to ride, even though he could not do it himself. I remember one time he tried. He always talked to me like he knew exactly what he was doing, and he didn't, but... Oh. And he was hard on me, and so was Miss Roz, but they both helped me to do things I never thought I'd ever be able to do, and they always got the best out of you, and he always got the best out of you when he really believed you could. And I'm very grateful for the 20 long years that I got to be with him, and that he got to be my grandfather. Thank you all for coming today.
I hope I can make it through this. I'm sure everyone's had a good friend. They say you're a blessed man or woman if you can make it through life and have, just at least a handful of good friends. Alan's number 2 for me. So I'm sorry about that. What a beautiful family he has. The kids and the grandkids. I am so looking forward to having grandkids someday. I just have one child. And kids, you're wonderful. I've heard all the stories from riding the horses to all the other little stories. I guess I've known Alan about 20 years. I met him in the insurance industry, and he was a broker. And a lot of brokers in the insurance industry, they weren't very friendly. Well, Alan always had an open mind and was very personable and everything. And we worked together, and I was working for a company that was pretty far out there as far as programs and such. And Alan really took noticed those programs, and we spent a lot of time together and dogged if we didn't sell a lot of big accounts based upon these wellness programs that we would put in place and all. So I was real proud to work with Alan. I always enjoyed going up to Knoxville and visiting him and with Larry in his office and all. But I love the outdoors. I love hunting and fishing and camping. Turns out that Alan does too. So we'd always go hunting and fishing together. And I want to tell you about one trip that we'd go on. I had some land in Chattanooga that this was, 15 years ago or so. And I had a pop-up hunting blind. And we'd go down to Chattanooga, and we'd talk the night before, and he was always so excited because it reminded him of his childhood hunting and fishing. So he'd come down to my house, 4 o'clock in the morning in Sweetwater, and we'd load up my truck, and he was always so excited. And I always enjoyed just being with him. We could talk about anything, and it was just a wonderful time. He was really a true friend. But anyhow, we got down to our hunting spot. Alan was so excited about going. And I'm like, okay, Alan, we got to be really quiet. We got to get out of the car and shut the door, because the deer may hear us and all this stuff. So I'd have the pop-up hunting blind here and my chair, and he'd be carrying his chair. And he always had his camouflage clothing on. He'd have pants from World War II. He'd have a shirt from a Korean, He'd have some desert camo thing for his face. I never had the heart to tell him that he didn't need to wear those camos because we were in a hunting blind. They couldn't see anyhow. But I so enjoyed just sitting next to that blind and look, we'd sit a foot apart from one another in that little spot on the blind that we'd look for deer. And I'd look over at him, and everybody knew that grin that he had. He'd just look over at me and grin, and it was just priceless. We had the best time. But anyhow, we were headed to our spot, and I said, here, Alan, hold the flashlight. So he was holding the flashlight. In the meantime, I was trying to navigate this pop-up blind. You'd pull up a section of it, and it'd stay open and try to get the next section, and then it'd collapse. And anyhow, I spent about 15 minutes on the ground cussing and all this stuff. I was so mad about trying to get this blind up, and I saw the light from the flashlight bouncing around, and I'm all tangled up with this thing, and Alan's sitting back there with the flashlight going like this, going it's bouncing all around. He later said I was wrestling. He had the biggest kick out of me wrestling with that pop-up blind. Let's see. And after our hunting or fishing trips, we'd always go out to eat and sit down and, sit down to eat. And we'd always choose a booth. And Alan would just take his arms like this, and read the menu and sit there, and I'd be across. And the little waitress would come up to us, and Alan knew what was going to happen and all. And I'd sit there with a serious face, and she'd come up, can I help you? And I'd look at her with a real serious face, and I said, does he look at him real close. Give him a good close. See, he's somebody famous. Do you recognize who he is? And that waitress would stop what she's doing, and she'd look him down and up and everything, and Alan would just sit there with that grin on his face. And that waitress would say, he kind of looks familiar, but who is he? And I'd say, he's a world-famous hog hunter. He'd grin and laugh and all that stuff. It was really... Every time we'd go to a restaurant, he knew that we were going to do that. There's a thing about heaven, that it's measured, it was in the Bible, I don't know which verse, but it was measured in, reeds would grow next to the lake or whatever. They used reeds as a measurement, and some biblical historian put that in miles. And I heard that heaven is 1,500 miles high, 1,500 miles deep, and 1,500 miles wide. Think of that. Is that not something to think of? And when I get to heaven, when I get through the pearly gates, I'm going to hear Alan say, this is how he answered the phone every time I talked with him. And I'd call him every couple of weeks, and we'd talk for 45 minutes up until he got really, really sick. He'd answer the phone, "Hey, buddy." So I look forward to hearing that when I get to heaven someday. Y'all have a beautiful family and beautiful friends. So thank you.
I'm Ann McKinney, and I was privileged to have Alan as a friend for decades and decades. When I was growing up, I had a few close girlfriends, but I believed that girls couldn't really have boy friends and nothing more. And I believed that all my life until I met Alan Wilhoit. He helped me personally and professionally in my career so much that I can never express how valuable he was as a friend, as a mentor, as a colleague to me. He helped me so much, and I want to thank Mary Ann and Tommy and Joe and Megan and Anna for including our little family in so many outings, so many adventures, so many invitations to which we said yes as often as we could. We went to Indian Boundary together. It was beautiful. I had never seen it before, didn't know anything about it. We went hiking in the Smoky Mountains. We spent hours around the campfire talking about millions of different things until way past midnight. We went on trips to the beach. He gave me some of the best memories that I will ever have for family to be together and to enjoy each other. He was professionally a consummate professional person. He wanted genuinely to help people. He was never pushy. He was never self-promoting. He was always concerned with finding the very best way for us to help our clients together to achieve their goals. And folks, that's rare. It's very rare. And I appreciated it so much. And from time to time, we would talk about books. And we were book lovers. And along the way somewhere, we talked about getting together with Larry May and Alan and me and setting up a book club. And we invited our spouses, but pretty quickly it's just dwindled down to Larry and Annie and Alan. And we would, I think it was the last Wednesday of every month at 7 o'clock in the morning, we would get together and go through a book. I think my favorite was The Power of Habit. It was a great book. We were working our way through the 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. We didn't quite finish, but we did decide that Mr. Peterson was in desperate need of a better editor. And it was wonderful. In all of those discussions, in all of those times that we spent together, Alan never said, "What would make you think that? Why would you ever say that? Why don't you do this?" He was quiet, gentle, supportive, and thoughtful. And during the darkest days of my life, when my heart was shattered, Alan called and said, "You know, Tommy and I are thinking about going target shooting. Would you like to come with us?" Well, he knew me, and he knew target shooting was a big deal for me. And I said, yes, right away. And they came and picked me up. We went out to the range, and we were there for a while, and then we came back to the house, and we walked in, and I said, it's a beautiful evening. I said, what if we sit out on the deck together? And they said, yes. And I got some rare cigars and some fine whiskey that were left behind by my soon-to-be ex-husband. And we sat out on the deck, and we smoked our cigars, and we drank our whiskey until, as Fogelberg would say, our tongues were tired. And they left, and as they were pulling out of the driveway, I got so sick. So very sick. I barely made it to the bathroom. And Alan called me 2 days later, and he said, how are you doing? And I said, I'm okay. I said, but I got so sick the other night after you left. And he said, you too? We sucked at cigar smoking and whiskey drinking. We weren't all that good at shooting, but once in a while the targets would flutter. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful memory, and it didn't matter that we weren't good at it. Alan knew that it wasn't the point to be good at it. The point was this kind, caring, curious soul knew that just reaching out and hanging out and sticking it out together was a way to help my heart to heal. And he did. And I know that he helped your hearts to heal too when you were going through bad times. In remembering and honoring him, I've heard the words integrity and character already. But as I was thinking about it, I realized I didn't really know the difference between integrity and character. And so, of course, I Googled the words. And I found a site that was wonderful. And it said that integrity is the steadfast adherence to a strict moral and ethical code. When you combine character and integrity, here's what you get. Character is your moral and ethical code, and integrity means that you live according to that code. That defines Alan Wilhoit. It defines every interaction I ever had with him, everything I ever saw him do. And beyond character and integrity was love. Alan knew that with love, you don't divide, you multiply. And Alan had so much love, and he multiplied it for all of us and for me, and he taught us how to do that with the people we love. Alan Wilhoit was the best boy friend a girl could ever have, and I shall miss him every day of my life, as I know shall all of us. Rest easy, my friend. Rest easy.
I was afraid I'd be a little too emotional to stand up here today. But a couple years ago, I gave Dad this book, and I recommend everyone do it. It says, My Dad, His Story, His Words. And one of the questions is, Dad, how do you want future generations of your family, and I'm going to add in there, and friends, to remember you? And these are the words that I think he wants all of us to hear while we're here today. That I love them, that I carried my load until the end, that I was kind and giving, that I didn't hold on to grudges, that I had good, decent children who contributed to the lives of others, that I apologized when I was wrong, and that I was fun to be with, that I was a giver rather than a taker, and that my flaws were forgivable, that I was somehow helpful to them. And I think listening to all the stories that I'm hearing today, it sounds like we're already remembering him that way, but know that he very much wants that to be how you carry him. And so many of you, this is a really long book, and you know how Dad likes to tell stories and likes to write, and a lot of you are in this book. So you can meet me along the side, and I'll let you guys take a peek at it, but thank you.
Hello. I wasn't going to say anything, but I've been inspired by much of what y'all said. But I thought there's a couple things that I should point out that we all have friends. Alan was a true friend. He gives me the strength and the peace when I think about him. And it's just by chance that we kind of got to know each other with the horses. And we just became really good friends over time. And a couple things that really stuck with me with Alan was he was so spontaneous. When you tell the story about if he wants to go somewhere, he's there. I think I gave him a few days' notice and said, "Do you want to go to Florida with me? I got to take a load of horses." He said, "Sure." Who does that? And so we were gone for, a couple of days, and we took a load of horses and brought them back, went all the way to Kentucky, and he just said, "This is just like an adventure for me." And it was just the greatest thing. And the other thing that was so spontaneous with him is he called me and said, "You want to go camping?" I said, "Sure." I said, "Where are we going to go?" He said, "Your backyard." And that's the first time I'd ever slept in a hammock that you can actually fall out of, but he showed me how to stay in it. And that's the first time he found the trees, he knew exactly what to do. We got in the hammock and we slept overnight, built a little fire, and I think we had crackers and bananas. But he was just an awesome friend that he wanted for nothing, but he wanted everybody happy. He wanted you to just be a part of his life, and he appreciated you. And God, there were so many stories with fishing and going out with Luke and things that were just, you look back and, boy, they make you laugh. He just made you laugh. And I'm appreciative for that. And thank you for coming, and thank you for allowing me the time to speak.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Rand McKinney. I am my mother's son. And I had the privilege of knowing Alan Wilhoit for 2 decades, but from 0 to 20. I see a lot of folks here may have known him from 20 to 60 or 20 to 70, but I knew him from 0 to 20. And the memories I have of Alan are perhaps fewer and farther between than many of yours. I was not a member of his blood family, though that did not stop him from inviting myself and my family on more camping trips than I have been on with anybody else, ever, including just my own family. And in those few collected memories, Alan did something that nobody else in my life has ever done, in that I cannot, in any amount, tarnish the memories I have of him. Many of us know a lot of people, and I hope that you all have successful social lives. And even with our best friends, if you think long and hard enough, you might find a memory that it just doesn't quite fit with the rest. Just that one thorn in the side of an otherwise perfect persona. But Alan, in my recollection, does not have that. He is the only man I have ever met about whom I can say I have no bad memories. The earliest I can think of is the now semi-mythical Indian Boundary camping trip. Camping, as I have seen, has become a very common theme in those speaking tonight. But the now mythical Indian Boundary camping trip that I am convinced is what instilled in me the desire to go out into nature that didn't actually pop up for another 15 years or so after that. And I remember other trips too. The camping trip, I do not recall where, that I had my first ever bicycle accident after rocketing down a hill at about Mach 7. And I was given the simple advice after being bandaged up to get back on the bike if you feel like it. Alan is everything I think of when I think of the ideal parent and the ideal grandparent. That perfect mixture of the go get him, son, get to it, and the quiet, contemplative understanding that would come out over a late night conversation by the campfire. And that I hope and pray that I can conduct myself in my life in such a way that I can be remembered like I remember him. And it's hard to put into words how much I have stood to benefit from those few experiences I had with him. I hate funerals. I hate speaking. Alan Wilhoit, when I think and read in Scripture, is one of the greatest embodiments of Christ-like living that I can think of. Christ tells us over and over again to give charitably of what we have. Some of us give of our money, some of us give of our physical resources. Fewer give of their time, fewer so give of their love. And of all the many Christians on earth, there is that select few that give of all. Of their money, of their time, their resources, and their love. And Alan, I have no hesitation to say, was one of those few people. And as we are here today, remembering him, I take comfort and solace in him being at rest now, because I have no doubt in my heart that he is in the embrace of the Lord now. Because there are many who call themselves Christians and don't act like it, and people who call themselves Christians and don't talk like it, but not Alan. He's a Christian through and through. And even when I first heard the news of his passing, it was probably 10:30 at night, and I was sitting by the fireplace in my home, hunched over. But I had no cause to cry, because I just had this voice in my head saying, he's all right. and he was in a rough place in the last days and weeks and months of his life. I visited the Wilhoit household on Christmas to drop off the good mashed potatoes as part of the Christmas feast. And of course, my parents have known Alan longer than me. But as everybody was getting ready to eat, and I was chatting people up in the spirit of Christmas, he looked at me, and in that quiet voice, as though it were the voice of wisdom itself, he looked up at me and he said, "You know, you sound just like your father." And I don't know, I was totally unable to craft a good response to that. And I'm still not 2 months down the line. But I think he wanted to make that known to me because, and he knew it better than me at the time, unfortunately, but he knew that he was probably not going to be too long for the world, I think. But that did not stop him from continuing to build connections between people. And in summary, I think Alan lived a life that we should all strive to live toward, and is now in a peace that I know he's going to appreciate.
I was telling my sister this morning that between me and Tommy and Dad, who all work at the same office, that there has been more collective tears that have been just wept over that place in the past month than the entire time combined. I'm Tiffany. I am Larry May's daughter, Alan's best friend. It feels very surreal still to be standing here right now, but I wanted to do it for Alan, who stood up and spoke at every important event of my life. I'm not sure how old I was when I met Alan. I was going back through my memories, and I think the first one was from when I was 10 years old-ish, somewhere in that age, and Dad threw all three of us into the car and said, "Kids, we're going over to Alan's house. It's going to be really boring, but I need you to behave because it's really important to him." And what it was Alan had these slides. I don't know which one of y'all mentioned it. It was a contraption that I'd never seen before, big circular thing, and he wanted to show us his adventure from his cross-country motorcycle trip. Well, I remember feeling very fascinated by it, but that was my first memory of him. My second vivid memory was from when I was about 12. And I had just found out that my little best friend had died. And it was life before cell phones. And I don't know if Mom couldn't reach my dad, but somehow she reached Alan, who came over to the house and sat with me at the foot of the steps by the front door. And he put his arm around me and he said, "I'm going to hold you until your daddy gets here." And I think that's what he did for me for all the years after that. Those years in between are flooded with great memories of family events and holidays, and I don't know, everything in between. Alan was always there. I think he was there in the ways that I don't even remember. I was looking through pictures, and I found one of him at a Young Life event with a bat, around his head in our backyard where he was spinning around and trying to run. He was doing an obstacle course. I don't remember it, but he was always there and always willing to participate. He was there. He test drove my first car with my dad. He was there at my graduation and my brother and sister's graduation, at our baptism. He spoke at my wedding. He spoke at my daughter's baptism, and I think everything in between. And as I've reflected over the past month on the parts of him that have impacted me the most, the list goes very long, and I think everyone has kind of mentioned it today. He's a man of deep integrity. He was a man who valued traditions, and he kept them going. He was very deliberate about that. He had so many interests and hobbies. It made him one of the most interesting people that I've ever known. And for me, he was just very generous with his love and with his time. I think somebody mentioned it already about the Stephen Covey stuff. I think for all of us kids, our life was riddled with that. Growing up, we heard things like, now, are you surrounding yourself with people who are raising the bar in your life? Or, just things that we heard over and over again. But it also, it was who Alan was. He was a man of great principle. Things were right or wrong. He cared a lot about justice and injustice. It also made him incredibly stubborn sometimes, and always made him somebody that was fascinating to talk to. I think for me, the thing I felt most inspiring about that is that he always was on a path of growth. He was always reading books and talking about the things that he had learned about them. And as Anne mentioned, I think the older I've gotten, I've realized that the people who are willing to do that are continue to grow, are few and far between. And if you really take a step back and see who they are, you'll see that they shine. And Alan really did, and he was always shining. His life was also full of tradition. I think people mentioned Citico Creek, and a lot of you all are here because you were probably part of traditions with him. For me, one of the traditions that he had, I remember after his kids had grown up and moved out of the house and started having kids of their own, one Christmas morning I just found them in the kitchen making country ham. And that was a wonderful surprise that continued year after year after year, and to the point where country ham and Christmas mornings kind of became synonymous. And maybe my favorite was our birthday pizza. He had found, it started after my graduation 20-something years ago, and he said, I found this new place down in Market Square that has, Alan was lactose intolerant, probably most of you know that, but he had found a cheese that he could eat and at this place. So we would go there every year for his birthday. And on the last one, I remember it was a couple years ago, we were walking back to his car just on a beautiful September day, and Alan said, I'm just so happy I could whistle. And I think he did just that. He always had that kind of that song in his heart. I once read that traditions work like a compass that guide us back to one another and cement that bond. And I think it's also what makes saying goodbye so hard, because Alan really did do that. I mean, he bonded us to him. I think the thing I did admire most about Alan was how multifaceted he was. He was into so many different things, from bowling leagues to book clubs to horses. He had decided recently that he was going to get into running because Tommy was into running, and set a goal to run all over the national parks, something he would have done had his health not gotten in the way. And I think even more recently he started taking up golf lessons and was doing really good at that. But he's always doing something new and interesting, and I think it's what made him such a good friend. He was willing to get involved and loved the things that you loved. And he found a way to be passionate about the things that you were passionate about and really get invested in that. I've spent a lot of time over the past few weeks thinking about who Alan was to me. And I think quite simply, he was my father's brother who was an only child. And in every true sense of the word, he was like an uncle to me. He didn't have to be, he just chose to be. And he invested in me in such a high level. I don't even know if I could possibly, if I know the impact that had on my life. I mean, he was just such a big, big thing. And I know I speak for my brother and sister when I say that. I want to say thank you to you guys, to Megan, Tommy, Joey, Anna, for sharing him with us. And thank you, Mary Ann. Thank you so much. We loved your dad and your husband so much. I mean, he was just family. And we join you in your grief, and we join you in your celebration of his life. And to all of you grandkids out there, the day that Alan became a UU was the proudest moment of his life. I don't think he took a title or a role with more pride. And I hope you all know that. And I hope that you all will take the very best parts of your grandpa and model your life that way. Get a hobby, volunteer, listen to weird music, do the things that you loved. Find a really good best friend and love them. Care about relationships. He was the best of the best. Not flawless, but wonderful. I'm so glad that we got to have him while we did. I think Alan had a superpower, and that was to say very, very profound things in the most simplest of ways. So I decided to end with a quote from an author who had the same superpower, Alexander Milne, who wrote Winnie the Pooh. How lucky we are to have had something that makes saying goodbye so hard.
About 30 years ago, there were two men in sports jackets and ties found themselves on a soccer field watching their sons play. And for whatever reason, maybe it was because of their age, maybe it was because they're the only two guys with sports jackets on and ties, but I like to think it was God. They gravitated toward each other, and they began talking. We began talking about a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And Alan said, I just came off of a vacation. And he said, there's a man on the beach or at the pool that I saw reading this book for several days. And Alan could talk to anybody. He was a quiet guy, but he could talk to anybody, one-on-one. And after 2 or 3 days, he finally asked, he said, what are you reading there? What is that? And he said, it's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he said, he began telling Alan what the book was about and how it had affected him, and he got Alan so interested in it. Alan said, I'm going to go to the bookstore tonight and buy that. He closed the book, handed it to Alan, and he said, this book's meant to give away. I've already read it. Well, as it would happen, the small group that I was involved in at that time was studying the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I asked Alan, I said, Alan, I don't know if you'd be interested or not, but we meet on Tuesday mornings and we have breakfast and we discuss the book, and you're welcome to join us. He showed up the next Tuesday morning and for the 30 years after that. He was at those Tuesday morning breakfasts. And the purpose of that group was to engage our hearts and minds in truth and invest in each other and help each other point our lives toward true north. And that's what Alan did. I believe that God had everything to do with meeting and our friendship, and I'm grateful to him for that. I'm grateful for the meeting that we had on that soccer field 30 years ago. And I miss him. I can't tell you how many times in the last few weeks that I've seen the Jeep at the office and just think, well, I'll go and ask Alan a question. Or I'll drive down Dry Gap Road and think about calling him and talking to him about the UT basketball game or anything really, but I do miss him. My life was blessed because he was in it. It's richer because of him. And there are many things that I'd like to share with you and many things that I admire about him, but I will share just a few of them this afternoon. The time is getting late. First of all, Alan was a deeply, deeply principled man. It's why the book, 7 Habits, appealed to him. His word was his bond. He kept it when it was painful to do so. You could always count on him to do the right thing. He was excellent at his job. He did it right. He did it well. And if he made a mistake, he made restitution for it. Secondly, he was very, very wise. I loved his perspective on things. I always sought out his opinion on major life events, and I could always count that he would have some well thought out, not knee-jerk, but a solid bedrock response that would always have my family's best interest in mind. I loved that about Alan, and I wish that I could ask him a few questions today, but I know he's looking over us. He was funny. Alan was funny. I think most people miss that about him. He was laugh out loud, deadpan, Bob Newhart type of funny. Whenever I needed a good laugh, I could count on him for a one-line zinger. Alan was really smart, too. He's pretty humble about it, but he was really smart. When he was a young teenager, he came in second place in an open chess championship in Greene County, second only to another Wilhoit, who happened to be his father, Rusty. Alan told me that Thelma never forgave Rusty for not letting him win that match. I remember one Tuesday morning after one of our breakfasts. It was a beautiful day, much like today. We sat down in the rocking chairs, waiting on somebody, I think, and we decided to play a game of checkers. And what I remember about that game was that about the same time that I got all of my checker players turned to the right side, he had already jumped me 6 times, and the game was over. As we were leaving, he said, "You know, I didn't really enjoy that." And I said, "Well, Alan," I said, "it's just checkers. It's just checkers. It's not that big of a deal." And he goes, "Okay." And it wasn't that he didn't want to do well, and it wasn't that he didn't want to win. He just didn't want his good friend to lose. That's how it was with Alan. He was very loyal. If you were his friend, you were his friend. And to him, in many ways, you were larger than life. The way he described a lot of you to me, I fully expected to see some Paul Bunyans and Mother Teresas when I finally met you. And after I met you, I decided that he was a good picker of friends, and he wasn't that far off. The next thing that I admired about Alan is that he carried his own happiness with him. He chose happiness. There's a sign in our building that has an Abraham Lincoln quote on it. And it goes like this: people are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. Alan believed that. Alan practiced that. He was one of the most adaptable people that I've ever met. He could go anywhere. He could get comfortable in any situation, and he could make conversation with anybody. I love that about him. Alan was the best friend that a guy could ask for. He attended almost every major event in our family's life. He spoke at my mom's funeral, and he wrote a beautiful piece about her namesake. Her name was Beulah. He talked about the importance of Beulah land and the significance of its meaning. He drove to Ohio with another friend and his son Tommy to be with me as I buried my father. He was there for my kids' baptisms. Alan didn't think he was a good writer, but he would painstakingly write and rewrite and tear it up and write again until you came up with a beautiful, meaningful, well thought out, something significant to say peace. I'd like to read to you something that he wrote at my oldest granddaughter's baptism. November 25th, 2017. Dearest Andy, I'm thrilled to be present today at the occasion of your baptism. When I think about it, you're already so blessed. You need only to look as far as your family to find your role models among Christian women. I've known your mother, Tiffany, since her baptism at 12, and I remember her once grieving in her mother's arms when a little friend whom she loved had died in a car accident. Faith helped her there. I remember her brave and moving talks along the way at her college graduation and later at her grandmother's funeral. My experience at family gatherings with your mother and grandmother, friends are treated like family and family are treated like friends. And after school years, I remember getting warm personal postcards from you from your travels abroad. Andy, your mom asked me to say something to you today that maybe I could share with you or she could share with you later in life. And I wondered, what is it that I could say or what I should say? And I thought about your grandfathers, who are deeply respected disciples of Christ. And they'll teach you about him. But then I thought, how fortunate you are to have such good women to follow. Andy, I personally recommend that you make every effort to mirror the goodness and the gentleness of your mother and your grandmother and your Aunt Tori. If you do that, if you follow these loving Christian women, I'm confident you will grow up to be a good and godly woman yourself. With love and affection, your great uncle in spirit, Alan, a.k.a. Yu. He came to every party that we threw at our house, and we threw a lot of parties. And he always made himself at home. He didn't need to be taken care of. He could get comfortable. He could talk. He'd have a good time. he was always welcome at our home. He was a good fit. My wife says that her favorite memories of Alan are him sitting in the red chair at our house and watching a ball game. He even cheered for Ohio State. He didn't care about Ohio State. He cared about his friend who cared about Ohio State. He showed up at on Christmas mornings. He'd make country ham and cornbread. Not just any cornbread, but Greene County Salt Rising cornbread. He was serious about his cornbread. Serious about his cornbread. We used to have, I had a nephew, Darren, who lost his father at 2 years of age, and he spent a lot of time at our house. Every party that we had, every get-together, he was there, and Alan was there. And he was trying to figure out how Alan fit into our family. And he asked my wife, he said, is Uncle Alan, he called him Uncle Alan, he said, is he related to us? And Valerie said, well, he's not related to us, he's just a really, really good friend. And Darren said, well, he feels like family. And he did. And he was. But it was his own family that was dearest to him. We spent countless hours on the deck of deck porch of my house or the veranda at work, and we talked about family. Constantly talked about family. We talked about what we believed in. We talked about what we wanted to instill in our children. We talked about what we didn't do well. We talked about how we could be better at it. I went over to the hospital when we all knew that he was not doing well. I prayed with the family, and this is what I told them. I said, your dad did not make one single major decision in his life that he did not run through the lens of his family. He loved you guys. He loved you fiercely. Alan was tenacious. Some people might say stubborn. He tells me he got a double dose of it from Rusty and Thelma. But he would take a position and he would have thought it through. And if you tried to change his mind, it was a fool's errand, because he had already thought it through. And he thought that he was right about it. I remember one time Anna was about to deliver, I think, the fourth child. And I asked him when the baby was due, and he knew Anna every date. He knew the date it was due. He knew the date that it was supposed to. But then he said, if it doesn't come by that date, they're going to instigate it. And I said, what? He said, they're going to instigate it with potassium. It's going to be a strong child. And I said, Alan, I said, do you mean induce? He thought for a second, and he goes, what's the difference? How do you argue with that Greene County kind of logic, right? He wasn't wrong. Induce and instigate's not far off. And if you ever were involved with Alan and he was in charge of an event, it was going to be painstakingly safe, to the point of like, okay, I get it, Alan, I get it. Painstakingly safe. He was involved with the Flu Shot Saturday that Rotary Club put together out in Halls. He was very instrumental in that event. And they moved it from inside the building to outside the building. Alan was in charge, and they asked him if he would kind of set it up, and he met with the sheriff, and he met with the fire marshal, and he got red cones, and he met with school officials, and he had some kind of circuitous path where people could just roll their window down and get their arm shot with the flu vaccine and move off. And I mean, he drove everybody crazy. He was painstakingly safe. You knew he was going to be safe, but he would not wear a seatbelt. He would not wear a seatbelt. Do you know why? Because Alan would never impose himself on anybody, and he didn't want anybody, especially the government, to do that to him. You know, not imposing yourself on someone makes it real difficult to sell life insurance. But he was the kind of guy I wanted to buy life insurance from. And I dare say there are many Northwestern Mutual life insurance holders out in the audience tonight, this afternoon. Alan was, it's been mentioned, he was adventurous. I love that about him. When he graduated from college, you heard about this 6,000 or 7,000 mile trip he took across the country on a Triumph, no less. They were famous for breaking down. Had a few bucks in his pocket, and he would stop and work somewhere, stay with a relative, stay with a friend, and make that trek. And then I think it lasted for 3 months. He talked about it the rest of his life. In his mid-60s, he started taking bowling lessons, joined a couple of leagues, and he really got pretty good at it. He bought a small John boat. He was so proud of that thing. He took me and made me drive somewhere with him, and I looked at it and I said, "How much you paying for this?" He said, "Well, you know, whatever," and he got it back, and then he bought equipment that was about 5 times more expensive than the John boat, but there wasn't a fish that was safe from him. He had radar and sonar, and he got good at it. Several people mentioned, Tommy mentioned his 40 years of planning Citico Creek and the week-long excursions. He started planning in in January for the April trip, and he and 40 other men who took their sons, and Alan would take his, and he just loved that trip. When he was 70 years old, he started taking golf lessons so that he could go out with me and, in his words, not embarrass himself. That's the kind of friend he was. The last thing is that he was a connector. He was president of the North Knoxville Rotary Club, and it was about to die. It was down to 17 members, and by the end of his year as president, he had doubled the membership, and almost every person there were friends of Alan, including myself. And you know that small group that I talked about that we met at for 30 years, up until a couple of years ago, we stopped meeting because of COVID, but every person in that small group were friends of Alan's long before they were my friends. He was the president of the local chapter of the CPA Society. He became the assistant district governor of Rotary, prestigious position in this district. I remember one year that each year, actually, they would gather at the end of the year and go to a large hotel, and there were 80 clubs, so it was a huge meeting. And they always chose a theme. And the year that Alan was the assistant district governor, they chose the theme of cowboys. Well, Alan was almost giddy with excitement. And it's because living in Greene County, they probably had, what, Mac, 2 channels, and a third one if you turn the antenna just right, and yet there was always a Western on there of some sort. He watched Gunsmoke, and he watched Fury, and he watched Maverick, and Bronco Lane, and Sky King, and Hopalong Cassidy, and Roy Rogers, and Dale Evans, Gene Autry, and Wild Bill Hickok. And on Saturday mornings, he would watch Marshall Andy and the Riders of the Silver Screen. They asked Alan if he would do the invocation for that specific year, and he worked weeks, and when he had finished with his product, it was a masterpiece. And it was so good that his prayer actually brought the house down, and he got an ovation because of it. I'm not going to read the whole prayer to you, but I'm sure that if you were interested, we could make it available to you, send it to you by email. But I wanted to read to you the Lone Ranger Creed that he selected to be part of this prayer. I believe that to have a friend, a man must be a friend, that all men are created equal, and that everyone has within himself the power to make this place a better world. That God put the firewood there, but every man has to gather it and light it himself. In being prepared physically, mentally, and morally to fight when it's necessary to fight for that which is right, I believe that a man should make the most of the equipment that has been given to him. I believe that all things change except the truth, and the truth alone lives on forever. I believe in my Creator. I believe in my country. I believe in my fellow man. And when I do make that last ride, which is inevitable, and when I go to that place up there where the grass is green and lush, and it's stirrup high, and the water runs cool and clear and deep, you'll tell us as we ride in that our entry fee has already been paid. Is that not Alan? I believe that to be a friend, you must have a friend, you must be a friend, that all men are created equal, and it's within the power of themselves to make this place a better world, that God gave the firewood, we have to light it ourselves, that we have to be prepared physically and mentally and morally to fight for that which is right. That's Alan. That's who he was. I'll finish with something I think Alan would really like. He read a story about Ron Howard and his father, Rance. We know today Ron Howard as a film director, but we grew up with him as Opie on the Andy Griffith Show. And Rance Howard was a man of integrity like Alan. And when the interviewer was asking Ron about his dad and his death, Ron Howard quoted one of his favorite poems verbatim. It was written by Henry Van Dyke. It's called Gone From My Sight, and this is how I feel about my good friend today. I am standing upon the seashore, and there's a ship by my side. And she spreads her white sails to the moving breeze and starts for the blue ocean. She is an object of beauty and strength. I stand and I watch her until at length she hangs like a speck of white cloud just where the sea and the sky comes to mingle with each other. Then someone at my side said, "Well, there, she's gone." And I say, "Gone where? Gone where?" She's gone from my sight. That's it, just from my sight. Because she's just enlarged and mast and hull and spar as she was when she left my side. And she's just as able to bear her load of living freight to her destined port. Her diminished size is in me, not in her. And just at that moment when someone says, "Well, she's gone," there are other eyes watching her coming and other voices ready to take up the glad shout. Here she comes. Here she comes. It's time for me to say goodbye, but I've decided I don't do that anymore, and I will not do that for Alan. I'm going to borrow a phrase from the French. This is something that they got right. They don't have a word for goodbye. They use a word and then a phrase, and it's revoir, and it means to see again. Re and voir, to see again. So with that, I will say, au revoir, mon ami, au revoir. Merci pour votre vie. Merci d'être mon ami. I will see you again, my friend. I will see you again. Thank you for your life. Thank you for being my friend.
Just wanted to share a couple of more things. One, Tommy reminded me that I came into Alan's good graces with a sermon that I gave early in my time here at Bookwalter, and it happened to be Alan's first time visiting, and it wasn't a particular scripture that I used or a topic. It was because I quoted the movie The Outlaw Josie Wales. The line in particular was near the end when a bounty hunter said, "A man's got to make a living doing something these days." And Wales responds, "Dying ain't much of a living." And when I said that line, Tommy and his father just looked at each other immediately and smiled, and I had his seal of approval then. Although I will note that they never invited the preacher over for whiskey and cigars. Tommy shared that the last 4 months of his life was pretty much him dying and not much living. But man, hearing these stories and all the witness, he lived how many lifetimes in the time that he was given? He lived it fully and abundantly. But during that time, he still stayed positive and was thankful for the care and attention of his wife and kids. And he showed gratitude and was thankful for everyone around him. The last thing I wanted to share was I have this print over here that will remind me of Alan just about every time I'm in my office, because it hangs just outside my office on the wall upstairs. It's called The Face of Christ by an artist named Joe Castillo. And while at first glance you clearly see Jesus' countenance, if you look closer, it's a composite of all the other events of his life. And you can look at that maybe on your way out, but it shows from his birth to death to resurrection, the entirety of his life. And you know, that's a wonderful way to remember someone. When I see the face of Christ, I will think of Alan. And it occurred to me that it might be a good way to honor Alan's memory, that we live in such a way that when people look at us, they also see the face of Christ through our love and actions and living a life like I've heard described here today. Along with John 3:16 and 1 Corinthians 13, the 23rd Psalm is one of the most well-known scriptures that we have. Many of you probably have memorized it, or as I like to say, you know it by heart. And they are comforting words anytime, but especially on occasions such as today. But because we're so familiar with it, sometimes it's hard to hear with fresh ears. So I wanted to share this afternoon. Is it tomorrow already? I'm sorry. I want to share a slightly different version with you before we go. The Lord was Alan's shepherd. He did not want. He maketh Alan to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth Alan beside the still waters. He restoreth Alan's soul. He leadeth Alan in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And yea, though Alan walked through the valley of the shadow of death, he feared no evil, for thou wert with him. Thy rod and thy staff comforted him. Thou prepared a table before Alan in the presence of his enemies. Thou anointest his head with oil. His cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy followed him all the days of his life, and Alan will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Ben?
So I have a small confession to make, and that is in the mad rush to pack everything, I neglected to pack a few things, and I am currently wearing a pair of Alan's old socks. The last time Alan visited us, he brought us this fiddle. I believe it was Mama Pearl's, and has been in her family for several generations, so it's quite old. He inspired Vivian and I to start taking some lessons. And he requested the song for his service. And it's an honor to play it for him. If you please stand for our dismissal.
And now may the peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God and of his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you always. Amen.